So once your student has chosen the subject for their book and kind of the idea of their book, what they want it to be about, then it's time to start thinking about the story's arc because each story is going to need to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. So when your student is kind of starting to think about that, it can be helpful to make a visual to kind of go with it. And each arc is going to kind of look a little bit different depending on when students decide to place things like the introduction of the conflict, the resolution, etc. So what I like to do is make a kind of a little map. So here we have the story arc. This is a pretty even arc. So we've got the beginning, middle, and end. The beginning is also, on my map, I can kind of also mark how the beginning is also when I introduce and start getting to know the characters. Okay. It's also when I introduce the conflict. Okay. And then through the course of the arc, your student can mark off other things that they're going to do and other things that are going to happen in the story that is going to kind of build the suspense on what will be the turning point. Okay, kind of when the conflict that's presented starts to become resolved. Okay, and then the conflict actually gets resolved a little later towards the end. Now, not every arc is going to be kind of this even. You may want to do a story where in the beginning we instantly are presented with the conflict. Okay, also at that moment we meet the characters, but maybe the turning point or when the conflict begins to resolve doesn't happen until the very end. So we get to spend the entirety of the book or almost the entirety of the book building up to the resolution. So there is no right or wrong place to present your conflict or your resolution or your turning point. But no matter what you do is you want to find ways along the way to help your student take advantage of those in-between spaces as places to better get to know your character, better get to know their world, and more care about the eventual turning point when it happens. So when it happens, it's not just a victory for your character, but it's also a victory for the reader, and they'll enjoy it just as much. So anyway, if you take a look at this sheet that kind of says the basics, the beginning, who is the book about? Introduce the conflict and really describe the world in which they live. These things don't necessarily have to happen in this exact order. This is kind of like a standard order. But maybe you want to put the conflict at the end. Maybe you want to put the conflict right at the first page. It's really your call. But we will get to know your main character based on how they respond to what happens in the book. Okay, so just keep that in mind. How do they face the conflict? How does the reader get to know the characters and the world through specific details in the way that they respond to the things that are happening to them? We're going to do a little exercise for that. Take out the backstory worksheet, okay, or you can kind of just follow along. And you would want your students to kind of think about their character besides what's happening in the book. Okay, so where's your character from originally? Are they from Brooklyn? Are they from China? Are they from Trinidad? Okay, so where are they from? And who is their family? Are they part of a pack of lions? Are they part of a large Japanese family of farmers that dates back for generations? Okay, who is their family? Or who's their family right now? Do they live in a house with 3 generations and 6 grandkids and 2 grandmas? And, kind of let's get a little bit of information on what is the environment that they live around. Okay, what does your character like to do? Are they a reader? Are they a dancer? A singer? So go ahead and encourage your students to pursue their character's backstory if they have time, or just mention it as something that's important. Okay? Another way that we'll get to know our character is that when we kind of like throw challenges their way and see how they respond to those challenges. So this is another exercise to kind of help your student get to know their character a little bit better and maybe even kind of discover some things that they'd like to include in the book later on. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of take you through this getting to know your character sheet. And I'd love to see what your students could do with their own characters, kind of reflective of this exercise about Stephanie. Okay, your character, Stephanie, leaves her apartment one school morning dragging her 5-year-old kid sister along. They walk 3 blocks and Stephanie orders breakfast at the bodega before realizing she forgot her keys and her mom is already at work. Her 5-year-old sister is hanging on her leg, hungry for breakfast. And the reason she even thought to look for her keys was because she realized she had also forgotten her wallet at home. How does Stephanie respond to this pressure and to this situation? Okay, so does she stay calm for her sister's sake? Does she just forget about breakfast and take herself and her sister to school hungry and grumpy? Does she go find her neighbor who can help them? This is going to kind of just help us know who Stephanie is. What is her kind of resourceful response? So let's just get to know this character a little bit better by how she responds to these conflicts and kind of layers of conflicts. You know, the responsibility of taking her sister to school, the responsibility of getting her breakfast. So all of those kind of messy situations can help us understand our characters better. These types of exercises will help to kind of deepen your relationship and then by default your reader's relationship to your main character and make them more relatable and more human and more specific. Your students' writing really won't be finished until their pictures are done, and the pictures won't really be done until the words are done. So the two will kind of finish simultaneously because you won't know exactly what words you need to cut out or add on until you see the finished pictures. And with finished pictures, you won't necessarily know what you need to add or take out of your pictures without the text. So the two really need to work in harmony. But one way to kind of continue trimming down the editing, and I know I do this with my work, is that once I have my pictures, I'll say, okay, does this already show this phrase in the picture? And if it does, I don't want to be redundant, so I'm going to cut it out of the text. So for example, we want to kind of go back to that phrase, show don't tell. Okay, so in Peter again, in A Whistle for Willie with Peter, when Peter does eventually whistle and he has this incredible joy, we can kind of see, or at least I feel like I can see in his pose, this incredible suspense and anticipation and then kind of surprise that he actually was able to whistle. And then the text says, "It's me," Peter shouted and stood up. Willie raced straight to him. So nowhere does it say Peter was so excited or Peter was so happy, because it doesn't need to. Peter shouted, "It's me." We know that he's excited. We see it in his face. And finally, in that gesture, it kind of says everything we need to say. So if you find that your student is struggling with kind of language that feels very obvious or very plainly stated, and already also shows the same thing in the picture, you may want to consider encouraging them to cut that out of the text, or see if they can find a unique way to kind of say the same thing with words in it from a different angle. You can refer back to the specs for the book, but there is a word limit, and sometimes we might feel like we need to use more words to say a smaller thing than we actually need.